What is public choice theory? The standard definition is as the application of economic methods to the study of political processes. But that's not very informative unless you know what economic methods involve. So let me say a little about that matter first. Economists are interested in human action, and they believe that action involves choice. When you make a choice, there's always something you could have done instead. Choice involves comparing alternatives. That's true when you're deciding whether to spend your money on beer or pizza. It's no less true when the issues are big ones, like whether the US should withdraw its military presence from Afghanistan or whether America should have policies to reduce carbon emissions. It may not be obvious what the alternatives are in such cases. Finding out might require a bit of imagination and thought. But economists believe that such imagination and thought are necessary for proper decision-making. They think you should always ask, compared to what? Public choice economists specifically ask that question in relation to alternative ways of organising collective decision-making. And in particular, when they ask, compared to what, they want to compare the outcomes of market decisions to the outcomes of political decisions. Why do they think that's important? Well, many people, when they see something wrong in the world, have a kind of automatic response. They say, government ought to do something about that. And when they think about what it is that government ought to do, they think in terms of the best policy that could be applied. Now, asking what would be the best policy, say to tackle inflation or deal with the Chinese presence in the South China Seas or manage the threat of climate change, is not in itself a bad question, but public choice theorists insist that this question isn't the right question. They think that asking this question makes certain assumptions about what kind of actor government is and what motivates it in its decisions. They think that this way of thinking about policy issues implies a benevolent despot conception of government, and they think that that benevolent despot conception is dangerously misconceived. Consider the despot part first. When you ask, what should government do, it seems to imply that government's just like an individual agent with the power to make decisions over policy options according to whatever he or she thinks is best, without constraint. But an individual with that kind of power would be a despot. Instead, in democratic systems, government is subject to elections. Governments therefore have to implement policies that appeal to the electorate. Indeed, that maximise the chance that they'll win the next election. To ignore those electoral factors is to ignore an absolutely key piece of the democratic system, which means that to analyse what the best policy option would be without considering whether such a policy could appeal to voters or survive the real-world legislative process is a case of Hamlet without the prince. Public choice theorists want to put the democratic electoral process centre stage in any analysis of policy. They want to ask not what policy would be best, but rather what policy is likely to emerge from real-world democratic politics. And how does that compare to market alternatives? And then there's the benevolent part of the benevolent despot. When you ask, what should government do, you also imply that those in government are motivated to try to choose the very best policies for the public good. But when it comes to political agents, it's surely a mistake simply to assume that what motivates such persons exclusively is their desire to do good. After all, the working assumption in economics is that ordinary folk operating in markets are motivated predominantly by self-interest. Why should we assume that politicians and bureaucrats are motivated any differently than anyone else? To be sure, any serious candidate for political office, from president down, makes out that he or she is basically a good person, someone who really cares about the people. But there's always more to it than that. Candidates want to be elected, they want the political power and the public attention that goes with office. They often rather like free holidays and lavish gifts, which is why in most democracies there are laws that aim to stop politicians from accepting these things. The logic of public choice theory is that we need to take seriously the fact that government is a complex social machine, inhabited by people who are more or less the same as everyone else, and in which periodic elections play a central role. The critical question for assessing policy is not what policy is the best we can imagine, but rather what, from what we know of real-world politics, is the policy that's most likely to emerge from the policy determination process. Public choice theorists think that there are some systematic things one can say about this latter question. They develop formal theories about how majority rule, a key feature of democratic elections, operates in certain settings. They worry about the incentive that parties and candidates have to shift the cost of their programs onto future taxpayers and the associated public debt problem. They worry more generally about the incentive any current regime has to make it appear that their policies cost less than they actually do or will. They also analyse lobbying processes, what political donors expect to gain from making campaign contributions, and whether the pattern of lobbying more or less tracks the distribution of interests across the economy. All of this involves subjecting democratic political process to critical scrutiny, often with distinctly unromantic assumptions about politicians' motivations. James Buchanan, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his public choice work, frequently described public choice as politics without romance. But being unromantic about democracy can make you unpopular in certain circles. Democracy in most Western countries is a kind of sacred cow. To show that it fails to produce ideal policies has been interpreted by some commentators as democracy bashing. But I think that description's just plain wrong. Public choice economists believe in democracy. They believe that political power needs to be held in check, and they think that this is precisely what democracy is there to do. The real question is how well democracy does it, and how it might do it better. Winston Churchill is reputed to have remarked that democracy is the worst system of government, except for all the rest. Public choice scholars tend to like this quote because it captures two key ideas. First, that democracy is, after all, the best system available. But second, that heroic views of what democracy can actually achieve encourage false expectations. Such false expectations can lead to two bad outcomes. They can either make people disenchanted with democracy, and they can lead them to consider worse alternatives like various forms of authoritarianism, or they lead to government overload, trying to get government to do too much, including things that could be done better without government getting involved.